Thank you very much, Chuck. And I would really just like to say, because it is time when Chuck will be leaving soon, what an incredible impact you've had over so many years, as well as Megan as well. But I mean, I was looking at it, and I think there are about 3,000 Morehead-Cain scholars around the world, and Chuck has basically been a guiding light for about 1,500 of them, if not more. And I think, well, I know both of you together, and I think all of those that I've met and know, I think I can speak for them by saying that really you have been incredible influence and incredible sort of guiding hand and a sort of a shoulder of support over years and years and years. It's really an impressive, incredible legacy. But I want to. But I also want to thank you, all these, the faculty that are here, the distinguished faculty here, Chancellor, who stole all my best lines. No. Obviously, there's some scholars here, I think, or at least one that I know, and of course, the most important people, the finalists, really outstanding finalists. I've had a chance to speak with a few of you. I've sort of been wowed myself. I do quite a lot of television. I suddenly feel quite intimidated in this audience because there's a lot of sparks flying amongst you, and I'm sure you're all going to set the world alight in your own different ways. And I hope you're actually having a good time here at Chapel Hill. It's a great opportunity to come here and experience the place. Blue skies. It's been raining for about 3 years in London, so it's like, this is fantastic for me. Welcome, and it's wonderful that you're here. It's common to kind of begin with a catchphrase, but it's often said, and I was talking to one of the British candidates that's here, that I think George Bernard Shaw said, the United States and Britain are two nations divided by a common language. And I just want you to join with me in helping to prove George Bernard Shaw wrong. I hope that we can be united by our common language. I also did think briefly when speaking this evening, I was like, when I was at Carolina, I did try a lot to I really wanted to nail my Southern accent. I wanted to get it just right. And I thought, should I try to put on a bit of a Southern drawl here and there? How would that go down? I lived my senior year with three North Carolinian friends. They were all from Charlotte, and I think they got really fed up with me trying to sound like I was from Rocky Mount. At least one of them still speaks to me, and I know that because he sent me a WhatsApp saying, please do not put on your North Carolina accent. So I will spare you that horror. I will stick to what I know. If I am sort of unintelligible in any way, I have just one small piece of advice. As they sometimes say, if it's in an English accent, it sounds more intelligent. So whether it is or not doesn't matter. But if someone says to you afterwards, what did he talk about, and you didn't get it, you can just say, I don't know, it was in an English accent, but it sounded intelligent, and we'll be done. We'll be done. So I want to speak to you about three things. I want to talk about what education really means, what it means to be a hero, and connecting to the world. But in order to do that, I feel like I have to sort of step back. It's been 25 years since I was last here on campus. It really doesn't feel like more than, honestly, a month has gone by. And I've been running around campus in the last couple of days, just sort of soaking it in and really enjoying this place again. But it does require some backstory, because I don't want to sort of refer to any ages, but if I say it's 25 years since I've been here, I am conscious of the fact that many of you in this room are probably younger than 25. So I should give you some sense of, I was once in your position. I'm not some graying boomer. So I first heard about the Morehead-Cain in 1990. I was what you would call a junior in high school. 1990 was a really tumultuous year. It was like the year after the Berlin Wall had come down. Germany was reunified. There was a build-up to a war in the Middle East. Mandela was released from prison. It was a really tumultuous year. Actually, I wasn't really thinking about those things. Even though I think about those things all the time now, I was in a school in the west of England, in a pretty rural town, and I'd been in that town since the age of 7. I was sort of packed off to boarding school with my trunk of worldly possessions at the age of 7 3/4. And I spent basically the next 11 years in this town, either the prep school or the senior boarding school. Anyone thinking this is somehow sort of Harry Potterish or Hogwarts, get that idea out of your head. I don't want to exaggerate, but it meant a lot of kind of, the dormitories had splinters in the floor and the beds were cast iron with broken springs. It really wasn't some sort of romantic vision of British boarding school. Well, I'm exaggerating somewhat, but it was kind of a lot of rugby played in the pouring rain and a lot of sort of, quite sometimes felt miserable. So I'm thinking, how do I get out of this? What's my escape route? I'd done pretty well in my exams that we take at 16, and I was preparing for the next lot of exams we take, the national exams, what we call A-levels, and everything was sort of looking, I suppose, following an expected course. I was looking at going to Cambridge. I'd been offered a place there to study Spanish and Italian, and to all intents and purposes, that looked like the next hoop that you have to jump through. And then on campus one day, a British Morehead-Cain alumnus arrived to talk about, and he'd been at my school, to talk about the scholarship. And I sort of went along just to see what it was all about. Now, of course, I seem to remember this, I know him still, but I seem to remember him at the time looking terribly suntanned, and he had perfect teeth, which, English people weren't supposed to have perfect teeth, And he talked about this amazing scholarship, 4 years in America. I think I can almost imagine, I can picture the scene in my head, that I didn't really know my North Carolinas from my Southern Californias at that stage. So I kind of thought maybe it was by the Pacific, there'd be some surfing involved, there'd be palm trees. We still have blue skies, but the beaches are way away. But it was a really, journalists hate cliches, and I would definitely teach that cliches are the worst thing, but it really was a bit of a light bulb moment. I could see suddenly this opportunity to completely change where I was headed, the opportunities I had in front of me, and I was beyond intrigued. I mean, it was enough that I went back to my parents and I said, I've heard about this amazing opportunity. By chance, we then went on holiday to Georgia, not the country in the Central Asian state, but in the south. We were in Georgia, and we drove up to Carolina for the day. Not just the day, but we took a couple of days to drive up and came to Chapel Hill. Had a chance to visit the foundation and soak in what this place was all about. I hadn't applied at this stage, but I was really, I was kind of wowed. I seem to remember driving back to Georgia, mostly sort of singing James Taylor in my head, thinking this is the place, I've got Carolina in my mind, I'm going there. So I got back to the UK, and it turned out I'd been offered this place at Cambridge, but I had to get the grades, and then I went ahead and applied for the Morehead, or as it was called then, the Morehead-Cain. I will make that mistake from time to time, please forgive me. And as I stand here, it still astonishes me to think that after several rounds of interviews and things, I did end up getting this being offered this incredible opportunity, which I should add, I fervently hope that everyone sitting in this room also ends up being offered. And then I had a choice. And I want to sort of think a little bit about that choice with you, because I think in lots of ways, many of you are going to face something similar. Not identical, but something similar. I had a choice between, on the one hand, Cambridge, and, if you like, an expected path, something where I'd probably end up surrounded by people quite like me. I'd certainly probably know other people there. I'd know what the weather was like. It's sort of the spires, if you like, the spires and cloisters and cobbled courtyards of a place that I'd visited a few times. And on the other hand, you have Carolina, a completely different path, a completely alien terrain. I wouldn't know a single face. I'd have to deal with a southern accent. It was definitely a very clear delineation of the path less traveled. I would weigh up in my head, well, is it these cloisters and these green courtyards, or you've got the Carolina Blue and the bell tower, and Cambridge, you have these ancient libraries and church spires. In Chapel Hill, you have a lot of church spires. You have beautiful libraries, not quite so ancient, but you have some sort of areas of comparison. But what really struck me, and I think was decisive, is that, one institution felt like it always had a foot in the past. It was this, if you like, sort of engaging paean to the past, a foot in history, always admiring itself in the rearview mirror. And you had another institution in Carolina that gave this immediate aura of thrusting forwards, a positive energy, an exuberance, a kind of, it has that history. It has, as we all know, the oldest public university in this nation, but it also was leaning forwards in a way that was so attractive and, for me, made up my mind. You knew that because I'm standing here. But at the time, it might not have felt like a very easy decision. It may not feel like a very easy decision for you, but I can say now, when I look back, it was very easy. And that may sound blasé, but having done what I've done, and as I get older, I realize that I get less hair and I get more hindsight. I'm really rich in hindsight. I see now the different paths my life has taken, the sense of experiences and perspectives that I've been able to have, how I've really been changed as a person, and it really is down to the Morehead-Cain and the decision I ended up taking to come here. And of course I want to talk more about that. But in a way, that's just sort of the surface of it, because then, I got the scholarship, and then you have to come here, and then you have to deal with the reality. And that was so much more powerful, actually, and it has reverberations still in lots of ways. I'll try to explain. So I arrived in Chapel Hill in the late summer of 1991, and I just recently left my school in England, an all-boys, almost entirely all-white school. And the first course I took at Carolina was an honors philosophy seminar with a focus on ethics, race, and gender. And there were 12 people in the class. 3 of us were Morehead-Cains. And I'd spent my education in the UK, as I said, all-boys school, almost no other, anything but white faces. And suddenly, every assumption I'd sort of built up in life was being torn apart through this course, which was, I'd never really had to think very much about either race or gender. And I was thinking very intensely about these issues, and not just with the professor, but with the other students. It was kind of what I would call the very essence of an education. There's a French word for it, décortiquer, which means unpeeled like an onion. And it did bring, at some level, not quite tears to my eyes, but you feel exposed and having to go through a process of learning. I said it was the very essence of education, and I think it's good to unpack that. So I'm sure many of you in this room have done AP Latin, and you know more than I certainly remember. But education is made up of the word ducere, to lead, and the prefix e, out of or out from. So it's a leading out from something. And I've always taken it to mean both a leading out from ignorance and a leading out into the world. You have to learn to open your eyes, and you learn to then go out into the world. And that was actually the root of the second course I took in my first year, but the second semester. I want to do a little parenthesis here. Both of these courses, by the by, were taught by the professor, not just the lectures, but the weekly seminar that we had. And I can say that is something that Carolina should be so proud of. The ratio of the professors to students is incredibly good still, but it's not just that. It's that the professors are in close contact with the students, I think, are in close contact with the professors, both directions. The faculty-student engagement is incredible. I have a friend who teaches at Harvard, he is one of these super profs, and even he complains about the lack of engagement, the contact he has with his students, partly his own fault, but partly because he's in such demand to go and do something here and something there. And I think it's something that Carolina should be proud of, and it's really, from the point of view of learning, it's incredible. So this second course I took was actually quite famous at Carolina. It was called The Heroic Journey, and it was taught for, I think, more than 30 years by Professor Kenneth Reckford, who's no longer with the university, he's retired. But it was an incredible course. What he tried to do, it was in classics, but you didn't have to be a specialist. He tried to take the classical works of ancient literature, the Odyssey, the Aeneid, and talked about heroism. What did Odysseus do? What did Aeneas do? And compared and contrasted the kind of journey of the hero in ancient works to more modern adventurers, Frodo and Bilbo, from The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, and in between some others, drawing out the elements of what constitutes a hero. What does it mean to act heroically? And the fact is that hasn't changed in millennia. The same elements, the same pathways occur and reoccur in literature, and there's a reason why. Kenneth Reckford would say that to be a hero, you don't choose to be a hero. It's not something sought, but you need to take on a challenge. You need to feel that something needs to be changed, or that in order to resolve something, you have to go out and take on this challenge. There's then a journey that has its own trials and tribulations. It ends up putting ordinary people in extraordinary, men and women, but ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. In the course of that journey, there's a moment of realization that in order to achieve greatness, you must have humanitas, which could be understood as a moral purpose. And ultimately, the hero wants to return home. There's a sense of, there's nostos. It's this Greek concept of nostos, which gives us nostalgia, but it's the desire to return home. And if I lay out all those elements of the heroic journey, you can see, or I can see, that in a lot of ways that's what the Morehead-Cain is trying to achieve with its scholars, providing this opportunity to go out, to take on challenges, to pursue a journey, find yourself sometimes in extraordinary circumstances, learn from them, have a purpose about it, and know always where you came from. At least that's, to me, what Kenneth Reckford's lectures were saying. And I think it's really, when I stand here and think back on my time at Carolina, it's what I see that the Morehead-Cain was looking to achieve and provide us with. And I think it's really notable that Kenneth Reckford's son, Jonathan, was an outstanding Morehead scholar, outstanding career in business, and ended up, I think, still runs Habitat for Humanity. But I almost feel that, there is quite a symbiotic connection between maybe the founders of the Morehead-Cain were almost listening in on the lectures, or maybe they were providing Kenneth Reckford with some guidance on how you should interpret the Odyssey and the Aeneid. So it leaves me thinking what the special sauce in a way that the Morehead cooks up is. It does, I think, want to provide this heroic journey, but how does it do it? What is that? What are the ingredients of that special sauce? And to extend this metaphor probably beyond its natural life, what is the kitchen, i.e. Carolina, in which that special sauce is cooked? What does that kitchen do? I mean, the first thing I think needs to be really clear is that the Morehead-Cain isn't just 4 fully paid years at one of the nation's outstanding universities, one of the world's outstanding universities, but that in itself is a phenomenal reward. I think the really, you get a chance to spend really formative time with scholars, with you guys, with people sitting here. I've seen you already. I was in the lobby of the hotel earlier on, and I took a little video, which I promise I'll only share with the foundation. But there was one guy playing the piano, there were some people having discussions here and there. There was a real sense of coming together, sharing experiences. You know, it's as competitive, but at the same time, a real yearning of meeting of minds. That's inspiring, and that's exactly what this is about, and exactly what I think, you know, Carolina needs and is looking for, and the Morehead-Cain is looking for. So you have this chance to spend formative time with scholars. I've maintained really close ties with many of the people I knew here on campus, even if I don't see them that often. One of the people I referred to earlier on, actually, in that small seminar of philosophy on race and gender, one of the Moreheads, he's now a tenured professor at Princeton in sociology, a prominent thinker in his own right, and someone I still turn to, you know, a quarter of a century on for thoughts on what's happening in the world. This is an incredible opportunity, and I see it in the conversations I've had with some of you in the last couple of days. I get that real sense of that prospect is there, and it's a wonderful thing to grasp. So that's important, but there's also Carolina, and this is where I get the chance to say the Chancellor stole all my best lines. But I mean, of course you're right. This is an institution that is world-leading, but often people say, well, you know, it's sort of 82% by law have to come from North Carolina and 18%, you know, the rest. That says two things to me. That says that 82% of the students are the very top pick of the bunch that this great state of 10 million people, which is larger than Israel or Denmark or Finland, 10 million people have to offer, the very best that this state has to offer. And the other 18%, they're the very best that the whole nation and beyond have to offer. That's pretty incredible, but it's more than that. When they come together, you're bringing people with an incredible array of diversity. I don't just mean Morehead-Cains and non-Morehead-Cains or in-state and out-of-state. The full range of socioeconomic or ethnic, sometimes divisions, but you know, the range of diversity that there is in society. It could be coastal versus inland, it could be north versus south, it could be east coast versus west coast, it could be those that are really focused on race issues or gender issues, those focused on climate change, those obsessed with student politics, whatever it may be. It's bringing together people from quite diverse, sometimes opposing points of view, and putting them in a wonderful scholarly academic melting pot and asking them to debate with one another, to figure things out. Now, that rubbing together, that it produces outcomes. It's a process. It gets back to my point about the essence of learning. It's a leading out. There is a resolution of people's points of view through that discussion, in the same way that I felt that in my very first course that I took at Carolina was forced to reassess assumptions that I didn't even know I had. And you don't have to be a genius to know that obviously Carolina is at the moment at the center of a lot of campus debates in America. To my mind, that's a good thing. You might not agree with one point of view, or you might think one way or the other, or a third way. It doesn't really matter. That's what education is about. There is all the time a discussion going on, a dialectic, a resolution at times. People need to discuss these things, and from a journalistic point of view, it's inspiring that that is happening, and happening in a way that needs to be encouraged. So I think of Carolina as in my mind, an institution that's paramount and preeminent in that. I'm very proud of it because of that. I mentioned earlier on, my senior year, I shared a house with these three friends. They were all from Charlotte. None of them were Morehead-Cains. One runs a hedge fund in New York now. Another is a lawyer for an international investment fund, and the third is in Charlotte, a banker. They've all been incredibly successful. But our next-door neighbors One was the brother of a close friend who happens to be now working with the Chancellor as the General Counsel for the university. Another of his roommates in that house is a Superior Court Justice in North Carolina. And the third is the Chief Surgeon at Wake Medical up the road. These are all incredible people. I'm obviously proud of them because they're friends, but I say this because I think it really needs saying that Carolina is producing remarkable individuals who are making an impact, giving back to their communities. And that is something that I really think is a great testament to the university and what the Chancellor's doing. But let me get back to the Morehead-Cain. So I talked about, obviously, the scholarship, four-year scholarship, and the formative time with scholars, but I think if you speak to anyone that's done the scholarship, and I know you heard today from people who've had recent summer enrichment experiences, the summer enrichment program really is this critical part of the special source. It's quite difficult to say that, of the special source. I should give you a sense quickly of mine, although you have had people who've done it more recently. I remember I did some whitewater rafting and mountain climbing in Colorado and Utah. And, you might think I'm just going to go off and spend a month doing these great outdoor activities. I learned so much about teamwork. I learned so much about concentration on the movement of your fingers in your hand when you're hanging onto the side of a cliff. I also had to spend 24 hours naked on a rock overlooking the Green River Canyon in Utah, which is a story for another day, but you learn a lot about yourself doing that. I then spent a summer working with the Lakewood Police Department in Denver, Colorado, riding along with cops in their cars. I worked with kids in gangs. I visited maximum security prisons. I worked with youth detention centers. I was doing things that, frankly, these are windows that just don't open normally. There are things that I learned and experienced then that I still discuss. I don't think a month goes by in all those years where it hasn't cropped up in some capacity. I need hardly mention I spent some months in Latin America, in Peru and Ecuador, Bolivia, Colombia, I think, did I say that? Learning about the Quechua people, which I've never come back to, but at the same time, if anyone ever asks me about the Quechua people, I know about it. And if you want to know more about I can probably talk about it. And then I had a summer in New York working for a PR company. I didn't want to go into PR, but I learned a lot that summer about why I didn't want to go into PR and why I did want to go into journalism. And I met people that summer who were instrumental in shaping the career which I will get onto, but that I'm now so much enjoying. So all of this is there, and I think the Morehead-Cain is shaping these experiences in very profound, very thought-out ways. And this is something I want to really sort of emphasize. Sometimes I think back and I realize they were this magical guiding hand that was non-judgmentally urging you towards this feast, and it's out there on the table, and all you have to do is kind of sort of show your enthusiasm, your energy, your desire to get stuck in, and maybe, just maybe help change the world in some small way along the way. But it's basically there for you, and they are sort of they are non-judgmentally guiding you in the direction of experiences that will shape you, and that so few people get a chance to experience in such a concentrated, in such a well-thought-out way. There's been changes over the years, and so there are things that we were allowed to do back then that I'm sure you're not allowed to do now. But I think it's really more about how the thinking around how to develop younger people with your enthusiasms, with your intellectual curiosities, how to present the best possible opportunities before you. And they become, done and experienced in the right way, they are touchstones for life. I still think about them. There are conversations that I have in my role editorially where I will bring up something that I did in Colorado, and people are like, how do you know that? And I said, well, I once worked for the police department in Denver. What? So I exaggerate the story a little bit, just to make them surprised. But it happens all the time. So I think So you'll have, and that is something that is, it's not just a massive selling point, it's a massive life opportunity. It's a really shaping opportunity. But, where does all this leave you, I suppose, is the point, right? I've talked a lot about leading out of ignorance, out into the world, all these experiences, 4 years. What do you do at the end of it? Suddenly there's a cliff edge. So this time 25 years ago, I didn't have a job. I didn't know what I was going to do. I'd known since I was about 13 or 14 that I wanted to be a journalist. I'd worked at the DTH. I'd run the Great Decisions program at Carolina, which delved into foreign policy issues. I hope it's still going. But I'd written to all these kind of journalism outlets. I probably should have spent more time in the journalism school. And I didn't have a job. So I dropped my resume off with all the banks, investment banks, because everyone was doing that. And, I got some callbacks, and I must have said something right, because Salomon Brothers offered me a job. And I thought, well, that's great. Then they have what they call a sell weekend, where they want to fly you to New York and really show you a good time, really try to convince you to take this job. And I agonized. I had this invitation to New York, and I spent a good week thinking about this. Do I really want to be an investment banker? What happened to the dream of journalism? And I just really couldn't do it. I called them and I said, look, I'm not coming to New York. And my housemates were like, what's wrong with you? And I think Salomon Brothers were a bit sort of, really? And I felt sort of shocked afterwards, but I knew I'd done the right thing. And about a couple of weeks, maybe a few weeks later, I got a letter from the McNeil-era NewsHour offering me this job in New York, which of course I snapped up. But it also needs to be said that I would have made a terrible investment banker, and Salomon Brothers doesn't exist any longer. So, this is all. So I went to New York, and I became, as Chuck said, I started working for what was then called the McNeil-era NewsHour, with Robin McNeil in New York. And I would spend my days reading huge amounts of what we call newswire copy. I now work for a newswire, but Reuters, Agence France-Presse, the French news agency, Associated Press, and sort of basically finding out what was happening around the world and condensing the most important stories into the top 7 minutes of the show. I'd basically write what the presenter reads out, which seemed really exciting, but I've got to tell you, after about 3 or 4 months, I was like, this isn't the exciting bit. It's being out there where they all are, where the news is happening, that's exciting. And I needed to find a way to I talked about the journey, but to find another way to change the direction. I'll elide a few things, because it was a few backs and forths and false starts. I moved to London, I moved back to New York. I think I did that maybe twice. I worked for an internet startup. I then started plugging into the Morehead-Cain network. I spoke to, in fact, I ran into him the other day in Davos, but I'm forgetting his name. The New York Times, the bureau chief in Japan, not Frank Bruni. Thank you, Keith Bradshaw, who gave me very good advice. And then I bought this book on the internet. It was the first purchase I'd ever made on Amazon. And as Chuck said, it was called How to Become a Freelance Foreign Correspondent. And I basically took its advice. I read it cover to cover. I realized where I wanted to move to. I realized there was a woman quoted a lot in the book who seemed very happy to be quoted, and I sort of thought maybe she's happy to take some stories too. I contacted her. She happened to be the foreign editor of USA Today. She said, yeah, sure, go to South Africa, and if you've got a good idea, send me an email. I booked my flight, quit my job, and moved to South Africa. And I started pitching stories as soon as I got there. And I think I had an interview with Winnie Mandela, who was Nelson Mandela's sort of first wife, after about sort of 10 days by chance, and spent a day with her on a campaign trail. And it made the front page. I was like, wow, this is good. And then the Spice Girls. Does anyone still know who the Spice Girls are? the Spice Girls came to South Africa, and they didn't just come to South Africa, they came with Prince Charles and Harry, and they met Mandela. And so I went along. And Prince Charles Nelson Mandela said when he met the Spice Girls, "This is the greatest day of my life." And I spoke to his assistant afterwards, she said, he doesn't know who they are. But then Prince Charles said, "This is the second greatest day of my life." Of course, everyone said, "What was the greatest day?" "The first time I met the Spice Girls." So the story wrote itself. I think even one of the Spice Girls pinched someone's bottom. Anyway, I wrote the story, I took a picture. I've never made so much money because I was a freelancer in my life. And I thought, this is great, I can do this job forever. But then, again, as Chuck said, he stole all my best lines too. Reuters came calling, and and it was a staff position, and it was this opportunity to really be a proper, if you like, foreign correspondent. And I've been with them ever since, for 23 years. So for the last 23 years, I've basically, I've moved around a lot. I was adding it up. I think I don't know, 10 countries I think I've lived in. I've written and covered news in about 40 of them. And it involves a lot of, I've covered wars and conflicts, insurgencies, natural disasters. Whether it's in Afghanistan or Zambia or Congo, whether it's in the Arctic Circle or Swaziland, it's a case of being often in very unsettling or urgent situations, and you need to be always aware of dangers, always aware of what those risks are, always aware of what your limitations are. And all the time I'm coming back, and I don't want this to sound cheesy in any way, but there are often things that I come back and think of that came from experiences that I had through the Morehead-Cain. I remember once I was for the invasion of Iraq, I was embedded with US troops in 2003. I was in a vehicle with some soldiers, and we were driving from Kuwait into Iraq in the desert. It was nighttime, and the driver was using night vision goggles to find the way ahead. And we'd been driving for about 36 hours straight, and people were getting really tired. They were falling asleep. The person sitting next to there were three of us in the vehicle. The person sitting next to the driver was hit by a petrol tanker where the driver had fallen asleep and crashed into the side of our vehicle. And this person had to be medevaced out. So then I was sitting next to the driver, and then he was nodding off as we drove through the desert, ditches on either side. And he said, "You're going to have to drive." I'm like, well, hold on. I'm a journalist. I'm just here to watch, But I could see that he was really losing his mind. He was falling asleep. He'd been awake for 36 hours. He was virtually overdosing on sugar pills and listening to the most thrashing music possible, turned up to 11 on his, iPad. It wasn't an iPad. It was one of those Discmans. So I thought, well, is this independent journalism? What do I do? And I do remember thinking back, what is it we talked about? Moral force of character? What's the right thing to do here? For me, the right thing to do was to stay alive. Not just for me, but to keep him alive too. And so I ended up sitting in this vehicle, driving what they call a contact truck, a power truck, for the US Army, halfway across the desert, as part of the invasion force. When I got out of this car, I felt pretty bad, but I feel still that there was a touchstone that I had from my past. And it's come back in, certainly don't want to bore you with war stories, but it happens more often than I would like to say, whether it's events with suicide bombings in Iraq or in Jordan, where you're called upon to do things that you think what the journalistic instinct is, and you think what's the human instinct. What are the drivers and motivations here? What is the objective that you have? And for me, I felt that I consciously now, and I'm certainly thinking about it before coming here this evening, I realized the influences and the importance of some of the experiences that I had through this program that I think did help shape me and do help change the way that you approach things. And I think it's been very important and a kind of a fundamental kind of point of value and a touchstone for me in my career. More recently, I spend a lot of time, if I'm in Israel running a team of 60 journalists in Palestine and in Israel, we've got armored cars, we've got people who need to get flak vests in Gaza or in the West Bank. We might have someone, in a vehicle that's been shot at. You're dealing with crisis situations more often than you sometimes realize. You can't invent the circumstances. You can't make them up half the time. And you have to keep, obviously, a cool head. You've got people whose lives are at stake. You've got issues of religion and context that need to be constantly balanced about who you send where, what language you speak to them. This goes back to the point that I wanted to make, and I should have mentioned, but it's about connecting to the world. And I think it's one of the things that the Morehead-Cain does so well. I said, where does that go to next? Well, you were going out into the world. It could be the world in North Carolina. It could be the world on the other side of the world. But we all have to find ways of engaging with the people we work with, understanding them culturally, language-wise, making good decisions, thinking through the ramifications of the decisions we take, and using sound judgment. Also, we need to be resilient to being put in circumstances which are unexpected or maybe uncomfortable. And again, this often comes back to me, some of the things that I did do, whether it was in Denver, Colorado, or halfway up a mountain in Utah, or wherever it was, there are, if you like, atavistic. They come back to you and you realize these are the decisions that I want to take. This is the way I would do it. This is the instinct I have. This is the kind of process that I would adopt. And I felt that some of that shaping took place here. And I bear it in mind. But it's also more than that. All the way through the course of my career, there's been this incredible tendency for things that are linked to Carolina or to the Morehead-Cain to crop up. Whether it was a US diplomat I knew in Angola during the Civil War there, I was going to be thrown out of the country. I'd got to know him a little bit because he loved Carolina basketball, and he called and warned me. He's like, the government's going to throw you out. And I got out. In South Africa, Kessia Rust, Morehead, she was instrumental in giving me guidance about inequalities in South Africa post-apartheid, and she's dedicated her life to working with the most impoverished in South Africa. It's cropped up again and again with, even in the US military, a colonel I met who was from Fayetteville or served in Fayetteville and felt a connection to me because I knew Carolina. There's a Dutch diplomat who's a close friend who's an advisor to the Prime Minister. I got to know really well in Brussels. He lived in Granville Towers. He did his master's at Carolina, and we talk about it all the time. I was sending him pictures from the other day. These are touchstones, again, that you build that network. It's not chance. You build your own luck in that way, and you expand that network over time. You're already making that network now on campus, and you'll go on to make that network through the Morehead-Cain, through Carolina. There's someone sitting in the room, actually, that I don't want to make her blush, but I had a scholar in Paris, Rachel, who came to Paris when I was bureau chief to do an internship. And Rachel used just the right amount of sort of charm and persistence to convince me that she could come to Paris. And she made all the arrangements herself in the blink of an eye. She turned up in the bureau, immediately got stuck in. I was mentioning this story earlier on, but I'll tell it quickly again. I gave her an almost impossible task on the first day. She had to analyze polling data from 27 countries in the European Union in 24 different languages to predict the outcome of the European Parliament elections. She spent days with translation software running spreadsheets. She delivered predictions of seat projections for the European Parliament that were more accurate than the Financial Times or Politico, and set us apart. So I knew she could do some things, so I gave her more things to do. She went and covered the World War I, sort of 75th anniversary of the D-Day landings. Then with the Women's World Cup was going on, I was able to assign her to do that. Of course, there are many Carolina players on the team. She built good contacts with them. She took pictures that ended up in global newspapers. She helped with Reuters investigations. She smashed it. And whether, she goes into journalism or not, I don't think she will, it doesn't matter. She built up contacts and knowledge through that experience that will stand her in good stead. But, as I believe she goes and joins the State Department, it's great for me. I'm hoping that in 20 years' time, she's an ambassador somewhere. She's going to tell me the information I want to know. And all of you will do that too. And that's what this is about. You build that contact network. You build up that knowledge base. You build up that good judgment. And you use that network. Another couple of quick things. I mean, the Morehead-Cain now has this online network of all the Morehead-Cains around the world. It's like a map of the world. You can zoom in and zoom out and see where everyone is. There's 3,000 spread around the world. About 1,500 of them are in North Carolina. The other 1,500 are from Anchorage, Alaska, to Chile, to somewhere in northern China, to Australia. On Franklin Street, there's 4 corners, and it's all about basketball. The Morehead-Cain, there's 4 corners about the whole globe. And you can zoom in and highlight anyone, and there's a contact network there. And that's kind of waiting for you out there. And it is an incredible resource that actually I'm only just beginning to appreciate, but I know I need to use it more. So how do I sort of pull all these strands together? I've talked about the value here of education and what it really, I think, means. How you shape that journey that you're all kind of on, and what it kind of means to be heroic, i.e. to be ordinary and able to operate in extraordinary circumstances. And I think to connect with the world, we live in a world that is becoming oddly more disconnected, more tribal. You need to cross those barriers. You are the sorts of people that go and cross over, are able to culturally understand where someone else is coming from, or language-wise, or ethnicity, or what the issue is. What I was talking about in terms of what Carolina offers and the way that these issues rub together and people resolve some of their misunderstandings through discussion, through debate. But there's one other, and I want to finish on a slightly lighter note. There's one of the elements of the Morehead-Cain that I think is very important, and I hope Chuck and Megan would see it in the same way, is that I think you also have to be prepared when the moment is right to go against the grain, to recognize when the conventional wisdom needs overturning, when perhaps the rules aren't right and need rewriting properly. You need to be ready, I think, to think differently, to tap into your experiences, to know when the right time is to, as I said, to go against the grain. And I think in this day and age we live in, that's ever more important. Freedom of thought actually is becoming a very valuable commodity, and you need to find those experiences that allow you to think differently with purpose about what it is that you're doing. I have, amongst my 4 children, I have a 6-year-old daughter who is impossible to tell off. She's very sweet and charming, and whenever she sort of strays out of the boundaries and I'm trying to tell her off, she starts to sing this song. She's obsessed with the musical Matilda. I'm not going to remember the words. But the end of the song, and it's possible to tell her off when I do this. This is not an invitation to all of you to go and breaking the rules or but the end of the song goes, and I can't sing, "Nobody but me is going to change my story. Sometimes you have to be a little bit naughty." So that isn't an invitation to go and break all the rules, but I think it is, I hope, a kind of suggestion that amongst all the serious learning we do, amongst all the hoops you've already jumped through in life, amongst all the successes you've already had, amongst all the kind of objectives you have academically in sports or whatever it may be, even for the future in job or career, keep in mind that there's also a strand of you that I think needs to be light and go against conventional wisdom and maybe, just maybe, be a little bit naughty. Thank you.